V.I. Lenin, the Periodists, and the Period Group. The St. Petersburg Liquidators newspaper has published an article by A. Bogdanov containing the sharpest accusations against Pravda and Pravdism. The journal run by Trotsky, who yesterday was the close friend of the liquidators and today has half deserted them, has now published a letter, number 4, page 56, from the Paris and Geneva circles of the Period ideological and Marxist group. In Russia, only a single group in the Caucasus has come out in defense of this Paris-Geneva group, which has been in existence since 1909, that is, for about 5 years. In view of this, it would seem a waste of time to add anything to the explanations already given in Put Pravdi. Footnote. See pages 121 to 24 of this volume of Lenin's collected works. End of footnote. However, the persistence of the liquidators and their quondam friend Trotsky in defending the Period group impels us to reply to them once again, the more so that the accumulating evidence of an actual alliance between the liquidators, Trotsky, and the Period people affords an opportunity of explaining to the workers in Russia the political significance of this alliance from the standpoint of principle. The Period group broke away from the Bolsheviks abroad in 1909. At the end of that year it issued a pamphlet entitled The Present Moment and the Tasks of the Party, in which the so-called platform of this group was expounded. In the work of drafting this platform, we read on page 32 of this pamphlet, quote, 15 party members participated, of whom 7 were workers and 8 intellectuals. The major part of the platform was adopted unanimously. Only on the question of the Duma did 3 abstain, 2 Otsevists and 1 anti-boycottist. Unquote. This platform, page 17 and others, defended so-called proletarian philosophy. Of the names of the periodists whom the latter themselves have mentioned in the press, we shall mention the following: N. Maximov, Voinov, Aleksinsky, Lunasharsky, Lyadov, S. A. Volsky, Domov, and A. Bogdanov. Footnote. N. Maximov and A. Bogdanov, pseudonyms of A. A. Malinovsky. Voinov is pseudonym of A. V. Lunasharsky. Lyadov is a pseudonym of M. N. Mandelstam. S. A. Volsky is a pseudonym of A. V. Sokolov. Domov is the pseudonym of M. N. Pokrovsky. End of footnote. What has become of these periodists? N. Maximov has left the Period group. Voinov and Aleksinsky remained in the group but later fell out with each other and now belong to 2 different Period groups. This was officially announced in Paris. A. Lunasharsky has fallen out with Aleksinsky. Lyadov has evidently left the group. Nothing is known of his attitude towards the new split in the Period group. S. A. Volsky has gone over to the left Narodniks, judging from his regular contributions to the latter's publication. See Zaveti. Domov published in Period number 3, May 1911, a statement that, quote, he was no longer taking any part whatever in the publications of the Period group, unquote. Page 78. A. Bogdanov has announced in the press that he has left the Period group. Such are the facts. And now compare these facts with the statement of the Paris and Geneva periodists published by Trotsky. Quote, the assertion by Put Pravdi that, from the moment it came into being, the Period group consisted of heterogeneous anti-Marxist elements loosely stuck together and fell to pieces with the revival of the working-class movement, does not correspond to the facts. Unquote. The reader will see from this that the periodist statement published by Trotsky, who is perfectly familiar with all the names we have mentioned and with the entire history of the Period group, which he has assisted on more than one occasion, is an outrageous and glaring falsehood, and that what Put Pravdi said was the absolute truth. We shall also recall the following fact. Sovremeny Mir, in 1910 or 1911, I think, published a review by G. A. Aleksinsky of a book by A. A. Bogdanov, in which the latter was referred to as a quote-unquote gentleman who had nothing in common with Marxism. How is this to be explained? It is to be explained by the fact that the Periodists were really a group of heterogeneous anti-Marxist elements, loosely stuck together. As regards ideological trend, there were two such elements there, Marxism and Otzovism, which incidentally is evident from the passages quoted above. Marxism is the philosophy of Mach and Avenarius, modified by Bogdanov. It is advocated by Bogdanov, Lunacharsky, and Volsky, and is concealed in the Period platform under the pseudonym of so-called proletarian philosophy. In effect, this philosophy is a species of philosophical idealism, that is, a subtle defense of religion, and it was no accident that Lunacharsky has slipped from this philosophy into advocating a blending of scientific socialism with religion. Even today, A. Bogdanov, in a number of quote-unquote new books, defends this utterly anti-Marxist and utterly reactionary philosophy, which both the Menshevik G.V. Plekhanov and the Bolshevik V. Ilyin have strongly opposed. Footnote: V. Ilyin means V.I. Lenin. End of footnote. We now ask all and sundry whether the liquidators, A. Bogdanov, Trotsky, and the Paris-Geneva periodists acted honestly when, in publishing statements by Period and about Period, they concealed from the Russian workers 1. The fact that the Period group itself included so-called proletarian philosophy, that is, Marxism, in its platform. 2. The fact that Marxists belonging to different groups waged a long and persistent struggle against Marxism as an out-and-out reactionary philosophy. 3. The fact that even Alexinsky, that ardent periodist who signed this platform jointly with the Marxists, was some time later compelled to protest in the sharpest possible terms against Marxism. We shall now deal with Otzovism. We have seen above that the Otzovists belong to the Period group. This group's platform, as was pointed out immediately it appeared in the press abroad, contained a veiled form of Otzovism and unpardonable concessions to it, for example in point D on page 16 of the platform, where it says that, for a certain period, quote, none of the semi-legal and legal ways and means of struggle of the working class, including participation in the Duma, can be of independent and decisive importance, unquote. This is the same old Otzovism, only veiled, vague, and confused. Both the party Bolsheviks, that is, those opposed to liquidationism, and the pro-party Mensheviks, have repeatedly explained that such a platform is unacceptable to social democrats, that it is a defense of Otzovism, utterly fallacious and most harmful. The Otzovists were opposed to going into the Third Duma, but events clearly showed that they were mistaken, and that, in fact, their point of view led to anarchism. The veiled and modified defense of Otzovism we have quoted could not, in practice, have resulted in the line which Pravda successfully pursued, and which led the Pravdists to victory over the disruptors of the party, the liquidators, in the vast majority of the legal and ultra-legal working-class organizations. That is why, when the periodists to this day talk of quote-unquote uncurtailed left Marxism, it is our duty to speak up and warn the workers. It is our duty to declare that these fine words contain an anti-Marxist doctrine which will cause immense harm to the working-class movement and is absolutely incompatible with the latter. This periodist species of quote-unquote uncurtailed left Marxism is a travesty of Bolshevism, as the Bolsheviks said and proved long back, over 5 years ago. Even if the periodists have failed to realize it, we virtually have here a deviation from Marxism towards anarchism. The plenum of January 1910, the very plenum which the periodists referred to in Trotsky's journal as having endorsed their group, unanimously condemned this deviation as being just as harmful as the liquidators' deviation. Throughout 1910, the leading bodies set up by the plenum to carry out its decisions, for example the editorial board of the central organ, repeatedly and at great length, pointed out in the columns of their publications that the periodists, like the liquidators, were violating the decisions of the plenum, and that, like the liquidators, they were in fact vehicles of bourgeois influence on the proletariat. Footnote: Central organ of the RSDLP, the illegal newspaper Social-Demokrat, published from February 1908 to January 1917, prepared by the Bolsheviks and partially printed in Vilna at a private press. The first issue was confiscated by the Tsarist Okhrana, secret political police. Shortly afterwards, Another attempt to issue the newspaper was made in St. Petersburg, but the bulk of the edition fell into the hands of the security police. Further publication was arranged abroad. Issues numbers 2 to 32, February 1909 to December 1913, appeared in Paris. Numbers 35 to 58, November 1914 to January 1917, in Geneva. Altogether, 58 issues were published, 5 of them with supplements. According to the decision of the Central Committee of the RSDLP, elected at the 5th London Congress, the editorial board of Social Democrat consisted of representatives of the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, and the Polish Social Democrats. Actually, the paper was conducted by Lenin, whose articles were a central feature in it. Over 80 articles and paragraphs by Lenin were published in the newspaper. Lenin fought for a consistent Bolshevik line against the Menshevik liquidators on the editorial board of Social Democrat. Some of its members, Kamenev and Zinoviev, adopted a conciliatory attitude towards the liquidators and opposed Lenin's line. The Menshevik members of the editorial board, Martov and Dan, obstructed the work of the editorial staff of the central organ, while at the same time openly defending liquidationism in Golosh Social Demokrata. They prevented the pro-party Mensheviks from taking part in the work of the central organ. Lenin's uncompromising struggle against the liquidators led to Martov and Dan resigning from the editorial board in June 1911. From December 1911, Social Democrat was edited by Lenin. During the grim years of reaction and the period of a new upswing in the revolutionary movement, Social Democrat was a factor of tremendous importance in the Bolshevik struggle against the liquidators, Trotskyists and Otzovists, for the preservation of the illegal Marxist Party and strengthening its unity and contacts with the masses. During World War I, Social Democrat was the central organ of the Bolshevik Party, in which capacity it played a vital part in propagating Bolshevik slogans on the issues of war, peace, and revolution. The newspaper published Lenin's article, The Slogan of a United States of Europe, in which for the first time he formulated the conclusion that it was possible for socialism to win initially in a few or even in a single capitalist country. The circulation of Social Democrat in Russia and the reprinting of its most important articles in the local Bolshevik papers contributed to the political enlightenment and international education of the Russian proletariat and the preparation of the masses for the revolution. Lenin highly appreciated the services that Social Democrat rendered during World War I and wrote later that, quote, "No class-conscious worker who wishes to understand the evolution of the idea of the International Socialist Revolution and its first victory of October 25, 1917, unquote, can dispense with the study of the articles published in it. See present edition, volume 27, foreword to the symposium, Against the Stream." End of footnote. Since in Trotsky's journal, the periodists now refer to the quote-unquote first and second period schools, we feel bound to recall the facts. Half the workers left the first school because experience had convinced them of its anti-Marxist and disruptive character. As regards the second school, the central organ, in pursuance of the decisions of the plenum, made a point of warning the workers against it, and explained that it bore the character just mentioned. But who helped this second school? Only the liquidators and Trotsky, notwithstanding the official warning given by the party's official organ. In this second school we plainly see a bloc, an alliance between the liquidators, the periodists, and Trotsky's group, exactly like the one we now see in the columns of the St. Petersburg liquidationist newspaper and in Trotsky's Borba. This is an alliance of an anti-Marxist and disruptive groups, which detest Pravda's Marxism and the comradely party discipline which rallies the vast majority of the class-conscious workers of Russia around Pravda. We cannot but call adventurism this alliance like the period group itself and periodism as a whole, for nothing can come of periodism and its bloc with Trotsky and the liquidators except disregard of principles, the encouragement of anti-Marxist ideas, without openly preaching them, and the disruption of the working class movement. But while being basically and unswervingly opposed to period and periodism, we have never, and never shall, shut the door against those periodists who, like the majority of the founders of period, are leaving that group and intend to help the majority of Russia's class-conscious workers, organized and united by Pravdism. No leniency whatever must be shown towards the defense of Marxism, from which unfortunately Bogdanov won't budge, or of periodism, but no obstacles should be put in the way of comrades who have conscientiously recognized period's mistake and are turning from period back to the party. As regards the attacks and abuse to which, quote, those writers, Ilyin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev, unquote, are subjected by Bogdanov in the Liquidators newspaper and by the periodists in Trotsky's journal, we shall state briefly that these writers have always carried out the decisions of the organized Marxist workers, who have demonstrated to all the world by their solidarity with Pravdism or by their votes in the election of the Metropolitan and All Russia insurance boards, that they constitute the overwhelming majority of the organized and class-conscious workers of Russia. Acting in accordance with these decisions and in keeping with their spirit, these writers have every reason to consider that their activities are in harmony with the will of the majority of the Marxist workers, and they will not, of course, be deterred from their activities by abuse coming from the periodists, Trotsky, and the Liquidators. The history of the period group, of its breakup, and its repeated blocks with Trotsky and the Liquidators is a matter of some general interest to the workers, and even of some public interest, for it represents a typical case of isolated groups of intellectuals being formed in the period of breakdown and disintegration. Anybody is at liberty to form a separate ideological group and to point out a different road to the proletariat, but much will be expected of any founder of a new group. It goes without saying that nobody can be blamed for making mistakes, but to persist in mistakes that have been explained both by the theory and the practice of a movement of over 5 years is tantamount to waging war against Marxism, against the organized and united majority of the workers. The vacillations and deviations of the Liquidators and periodists are no accident. They have been engendered by the period of breakdown and disintegration. We see these bourgeois deviations on both sides of the road of the class struggle of the Marxist workers, and these serve as a warning to every class-conscious worker. P.S. The above lines were already written when we received a copy of Trotsky's Borba containing another letter from, quote, the Geneva, Paris, and Tiflis period Marxist circles and from St. Petersburg fellow thinkers, unquote. From the signatures to this letter we see that during these 4.5 years, the periodists who issued quote-unquote their own platform at the very end of 1909 have acquired in Russia 1 Tiflis circle and probably 2 St. Petersburg fellow thinkers. 3 would no doubt have constituted a St. Petersburg or Metropolitan or All Russia Marxist ideological circle! To anyone more or less seriously interested in politics, this result of period's 4 years of quote-unquote activity should suffice to serve as a criterion of this group. Let Trotsky amuse himself by uniting with it in the columns of his quote-unquote own sheet. Let the periodists and Trotskyists play at being quote-unquote powers, quote-unquote trends, and contracting parties. This is simply the childish make-believe of people who, uttering pompous phrases, want to conceal the fact that their quote-unquote groups are merely bubbles. It is amusing to read how these groups vociferate about unity and splits. Don't you understand, gentlemen, that there can only be a question of the unity of the mass working-class movement, the unity of the Workers' Party? As for unity with groups of intellectuals, who in the course of 4 years have found no support among the workers of Russia, you and Trotsky can chatter to your heart's content about that. That is not worth arguing about.